Center view.
Hold on. There we go. Okay. Can we move these over so I could see this pretty? Okay, one sec. All right, I'm delighted to introduce you to my father's photographic legacy. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me, Jackie?
You betcha.
Okay. Arthur Rothstein was a very versatile photographer. In fact, he used to say that his specialty was versatility. He had a prolific 50-year career as a photojournalist, documentary photographer, technical innovator, writer, teacher, and mentor. But this presentation,
Arthur Rothstein, a
his
daughter talking.
he was working as a government photographer during the Great Depression. When this photograph was taken in April of 1936, America was in the depths of the Great Depression, the worst nation's history. Unemployment had peaked at about 25%, banks failed, farmers lost their farms, and industrial workers lost their jobs. My father took this picture of Oklahoma farmer Arthur Coble and his two young sons, Milton and Darrell, hustling back to their house as a dust storm kicked up the sandy soil of their desolate farm. At the time, my father was just 20 years old. He had been photographing Mr. Coble doing his chores when a dust storm approached. They said their goodbyes. The farmer and the two boys took off towards the house, and Dad ran for his car. He turned around and saw this as he waved goodbye. Dad always left the last frame on each roll of film for emergencies. Good thing too, because this shot was the last frame on that roll of film. This is by far Arthur Rothstein's most famous photograph. It was the most widely reproduced photograph of the 20th century, and it's in museums around the world, and it became an iconic symbol of the Great Depression. If you're wondering why a 20-year-old Jewish kid from the Bronx was driving around the Dust Bowl taking pictures in 1936, I'm going to tell you the whole story. Arthur Rothstein on the left was the oldest of three sons born to European Jewish immigrants in 1915 in New York City. So Arthur was a first-generation American. Around the turn of the 20th century, Arthur's parents were forced to leave their homes because of government-sanctioned anti-Jewish pogroms. They found tolerance and hope in America. Much of the rest of their large family perished in the Holocaust. Dad had always been aware of his family's many sacrifices, and he was drawn to the stories of immigrants and the dispossessed, people who had to relocate due to forces beyond their control. In the Jewish tradition of Tikkun Olam, he used his camera to bring attention to problems in society, taking social action in the pursuit of social justice, doing what he could to help repair the world. Dad received a camera from his uncle when he was 12. This uncle taught Arthur how to use the camera and how to process film. They built a darkroom together. Arthur honed his skills by taking pictures of his relatives. He used his new camera to take this picture of his uncle by matchlight. Arthur was a gifted student. At 15, he graduated from Stuyvesant High School and entered Columbia University, where he founded the University Camera Club and was photo editor of the campus newspaper and the yearbook. Here's a picture of the Columbia University Camera Club members sitting on the newly opened George Washington Bridge over the Hudson River. During college, Arthur earned extra money making photocopies. There was no such thing as a copy machine back then. If you wanted a copy of an image or a document, you had to take a picture of it with a camera and process the film and make prints in a darkroom. He hired himself out to make photocopies for various scholarly projects at Columbia. That's how Arthur met Roy Stryker. a Columbia faculty member who needed photocopies for a book project. President Roosevelt designed many New Deal agencies to help lift the country out of the Great Depression. Stryker became Director of Public Information at the Resettlement Administration, a New Deal agency that aided farmers through loans, education, and relocation. Stryker, seen here with Dad, believed that photographs would provide indisputable visual evidence that Americans needed assistance from their government. He believed that photographs had the power to change men's minds. Stryker hired my father to set up the photo unit. This was in July of 1935. Arthur Rothstein was the first photographer hired by Stryker. Over the 8 years of the program, 17 photographers would shoot for the photo unit, including 5 women. Dad described the photographers this way. He said, "As a group, the FSA photographers affected each other, but preserved their individuality. Roy Stryker made us all aware of the need to understand the subject and to tell the story in visual terms. The photographers not only created works of art, they produced meaningful, factual communications," end quote. Here is a map of the United States as it was in the 30s, showing the range of resettlement administration projects that Stryker and his team were promoting. Congressional opponents of the president questioned the need for the resettlement administration programs. Roy Stryker used all the tools of persuasion, including illustrated newspaper and magazine articles, to inform the American people and help convince Congress that hundreds of thousands of dispossessed farm families were in desperate need of government assistance. Photographs taken by this photo unit were available at no cost, and as a result, the pictures were widely used. Despite his excellent education, Arthur had not traveled outside of the New York City area. For this new job, he would have to become a self-sufficient young man. He was a city kid and only learned to drive when he got hired in Washington. He spent much of the next 5 years driving around the United States on photo assignments that might last for weeks and months. In addition to several cameras, Dad traveled with a light meter, a film processing kit, a tripod, flash bulbs, and lots of film. He had a sleeping bag in his car because he often slept there. There were no interstate highways back then, and Dad often drove down dirt roads. So he had an axe to chop down trees that got in the way. He had a shovel to dig his way out when he got stuck in the snow or in the mud. He had a percolator to make coffee, and he had a Coleman stove to cook on. Meanwhile, the stock market crash of 1929 wiped out millions of investors. Consumer spending and investment dropped. Failing companies laid off workers. The photo unit fanned out across the country to document these hard times. In doing so, they introduced America to Americans. Wherever you lived, life was tough. This is a closed bank in Haverhill, Iowa. Dad took a lot of pictures of failed banks. This is a bank that failed in Kansas in 1936. The name of this photograph is Waiting for Better Times. Jay Huffman of Grassy Butte, North Dakota, sits in front of his closed store, 1936. Notice the signage. Dad often used signs, graffiti, and billboards to make a more effective image. This is a pool hall in Culp, Illinois. Again, signage adds so much information to this picture of a grocery store in Salem, Illinois. The title of this photograph is Unemployed, Key West, Florida, 1938. Besides the signage, notice the portrait of FDR. People showed their support for the New Deal agenda by displaying the president's picture. Here's a shoeshine man in New York City waiting for his next customer. Read the quote by Robert Disraeli. It really helps tell the story. It says, "The secret of success in life is for a man to be ready for his opportunity when it comes." In the fall of 1935, Stryker gave Arthur one of his first big assignments. In the hills of Virginia, hundreds of families were being relocated out of what would soon become Shenandoah National Park, the first national park in the eastern United States. In the park, high up in isolated mountain hollows, families were living in primitive conditions. In Shenandoah, Arthur would create a picture story illustrating a way of life that would soon be gone forever. The federal government constructed clusters of homes in the foothills just below the park for the displaced farm families. The displacement and relocation of families from Shenandoah National Park was covered by newspapers and magazines across the country. Here's another of my father's picture stories that was picked up in the press. In Missouri, over 1,000 tenant farmers were forced off the land they had worked for generations. The landowners discovered that it was cheaper to hire day workers or lease a tractor than it was to have sharecroppers living and working on their land. In protest, the tenant farmers demonstrated along 100 miles of state highway. Entire families were camped out for weeks along the highway. The Missouri State Police had been forcing families to move away from the highway. Picture stories that appeared in newspapers throughout the country caught the attention of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and she prompted FDR to act on the sharecroppers' behalf. After the president intervened, the protesting tenant farmers were given grant assistance, and some were moved into resettlement housing. Roy Stryker was an academic. My dad said that he ran the photo unit like a college seminar. He made sure that his photographers were well informed and prepared for each of their assignments. For instance, if Dad was going to shoot in an area where cotton was grown, he was expected to read all about cotton production in J. Russell Smith's Encyclopedia, North America. Each of the photographers traveled with a copy of this book. Arthur was expected to read up on the social aspects of the cotton industry, including child labor. He was expected to understand the history and the culture of cotton growing, including the plantation system. The photographers' research made them better visual storytellers. The photo unit moved from the Resettlement Administration to the Farm Security Administration, or FSA, in 1937. Thereafter, the photographers were known as the FSA Photo Unit. Arthur Rothstein's picture stories of rehabilitation clients celebrate the success of government programs. Here's Ernest W. Kirk Jr. with a team of mules, which was bought with an FSA loan. He's in Colorado. And here's the son of a sheep herder. Not herder, sheep rancher, who was a government loan recipient. And this guy was in Idaho. Howard Crowder's daughter playing with a litter of pigs. This was in Colorado in 1939. And here's Thomas Beatty, resettlement client. Here's Wayne Beatty, Tom's son, exhibiting his champion rooster. And here's Tom Beatty's youngest daughter getting a ride. Looks like Arthur created a comprehensive picture story of a farm family when he visited the Beattys at the Western Slope Farms in Colorado in 1939. The FSA photographers introduced Americans to the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, projects, which provided flood control. They built dams that brought electricity to hundreds of thousands and provided economic development by hiring an enormous number of people. Here are some of the 1,300 men in the 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. shift at the Fort Loudon Dam project. The TVA brought rural electrification to farms, which helped modernize society as well as the economy. Meet Mrs. Robert Bacon, farm wife, with some of her electric appliances. She's got a fan, electric press, and a radio. These previously unemployed farmers are laying track near Douglas Dam in Tennessee. These jackhammer operators are building the Douglas Dam in Tennessee. An electric refrigerator helps Mrs. Case keep her eggs fresh in Lauderhill County, Alabama. Extreme weather conditions greatly contributed to the length and severity of the Great Depression. In some parts of the country, there were devastating floods. There was widespread and persistent drought throughout the Midwest, especially in the Great Plains. The worst of it was in an area centered in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. This was an area called the Dust Bowl, and this was the center of the Dust Bowl. It was very flat and it was very windy. In the Dust Bowl area, the deeply rooted prairie grass had kept the rich topsoil in place for thousands of years. And during the 1920s and 1930s, it was plowed under. The soil was churned with gang plows, like this one, to plant vast fields of wheat. In the rush to plant wheat, almost no attempt was made to prevent soil erosion. And ranchers allowed marginal lands to be overgrazed by cattle and sheep. Overgrazing also caused erosion. This is what erosion can do to a farm. The combination of significant drought, strong winds, and erosion produced black blizzards. They were dust storms that carried millions of tons of stinging, blinding dirt. Enormous black clouds of dust, dirt, and sand swept across the Great Plains. The title of this photograph is Dust Storm over the Panhandle and the Town of Amarillo, Texas, 1936. That car is being chased by a giant dust storm. Farmers couldn't farm. All the topsoil was blown away. Dirt would swirl through the air, making it difficult to breathe, making people sick, suffocating people with dust pneumonia. Farm animals had no grass to graze on. They also had trouble breathing. If the drought and the dust storms weren't bad enough, hordes of insects would often descend to eat what was left of the withering crops. All that was left for many of the families of the Great Plains were failed crops, repossessed farms, and the very real possibility of starvation. So there was this epic ecological disaster taking place in the Great Plains, our nation's wheat belt. After each dust storm, farms were buried in sand and dust. Thousands of ruined farmers and ranchers had no choice but to sell or abandon their land and starving livestock. Many relocated in search of greener pastures. Amazingly, some farmers stayed behind and prayed for rain. Stryker often provided shooting scripts, and he told his photographers, while you're out there, get a portrait of what life is really like. And if you read this, you can see a check outline for photo documentation. It says, on the street, don't forget, you need to get the stores and the theaters and the churches. He explains all the things that need to be photographed during an assignment. Arthur's photographs showed the conditions in farming communities. They visually described why farmers needed loans from the federal government. This town was abandoned because of crop failures. Stryker expanded his photographer's mission and focus. Now he wanted them to create a portrait of America and a national historical record. When FSA photographers went out into the field on assignment, they did not just photograph drought conditions and government relief projects. They began to photograph everything about life all over America. Arthur documented people suffering and celebrating. This is a high school marching band in Butte, Montana in 1939. I think it's interesting to note that the 1930s was a turning point in the history of photography. Cameras became much smaller and lighter, therefore more portable, making it easier for photojournalists to do their job. See how Arthur has two cameras around his neck? He's holding a 35mm camera, and the other camera is the Super Icon B with its square 2¼ by 2¼ inch film format. He took his famous dust storm picture with that camera. Arthur was depending more and more on 35mm cameras. They enabled him to quickly capture intimate scenes, like this Cuban-American cigar maker in Key West, Florida, or this young bean picker in Maryland, this child laborer picking potatoes in Colorado, or this girl picking cranberries in New Jersey. New Deal legislation significantly reduced child labor in many industries under the National Industrial Recovery Act. However, the protections did not extend to agricultural workers. In farm communities, all hands worked. Here's Pete Seeger singing to inspire at a National Youth Organization event in 1940. Roosevelt's New Deal government enthusiastically supported unions and union organizing. These are wives of farm laborites in Kansas in 1936. Strike pickets in New York City in 1937. A proud steelworker in Midland, Pennsylvania in 1938. Union organizer working to better conditions for all TIF miners in Missouri in 1939. The Resettlement Administration helped many farmers keep their farms. In this photograph, a grateful farmer and his son thank the president for their drought relief farm loan. Sadly, many other farm families had no choice but to pack up their meager belongings and go. This family was forced to move by drought from a farm near Dickinson, North Dakota in 1936. All across the Midwest, farm families pulled up stakes and relocated in search of work. They were forced to leave their homes because of drought and bank foreclosure. Hundreds of thousands left the Central and Great Plains states. Many headed west to California, Washington, and Oregon. This is Vernon Evans. He and his family left their grasshopper-ridden failed farm in South Dakota and hoped to make Oregon in time for hops picking season. John Steinbeck's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Grapes of Wrath, was published in 1939, and the movie version was released in 1940. It's a story about the Jodes, a poor family of tenant farmers who migrated to California. Dad photographed real uprooted families across America who, like the fictional Jodes in John Steinbeck's novel, were living in dangerous, unsanitary conditions. They were driven by poverty and the hope of opportunity. This family had migrated from Tennessee to Florida to find work in a fruit canning plant. They were unable to find housing. Only the government, the Resettlement Administration, could help them. The Jode family may have been fictional, but their poverty, their squalid living conditions, shared by over 300,000 farm families, was very real. Recent research has confirmed that my dad's photographs inspired John Steinbeck's creativity. The fictional Jodes found respite in a government-run weed patch camp. That was the name of it, modeled on an actual FSA camp for migrant workers. The FSA developed sanitary camps along major highways. The government-run sanitary camps provided migrating families with clean and safe temporary homes where they could wash their clothes, take a shower, see a doctor. Food was provided in exchange for community service. My dad's photographs were used to show how government funds were used to help desperate families. The pictures also dispelled any rumors that the camps were havens for troublemakers or anarchists. By this time, Arthur Rothstein had become a seasoned documentary photographer and an expert visual storyteller. He had a deep understanding of the fear and uncertainty faced by displaced people. His photographs provide us with a rare glimpse of the human drama that took place in much of America during the 1930s. Arthur drove all over the country. Each assignment would cover several states and often last for months. This gas station was on the Colorado-Wyoming state line in 1940. Dad traveled throughout the Western United States too. He loved the West so much that he published a book titled The American West, Photographs by Arthur Rothstein. This is lovely, isn't it? Cowboys relaxing in the bunkhouse at the Quarter Circle U Ranch in Montana. Cowboy life seemed very exotic to a kid from the Bronx. Dad's trips to the West resulted in a lifelong affection for cowboy culture. After 5 years on the road taking pictures for the federal government, Dad was exhausted. In April of 1940, he took a job as staff photographer for Look magazine in his hometown, New York City. Stories in Look always had a strong emphasis on photographs. Dad had not lost his social conscience when he went to work for Look. His new position gave him the opportunity to create picture stories that brought important issues to light, including race relations. This picture story highlighted the indignities of daily life suffered by a young Black man living in the South. As America geared up for the Second World War in the early 40s, the photo unit of the Farm Security Administration was merged into the Office of War Information, or OWI, a propaganda machine used to help boost national morale and the war effort. Dad left Look magazine and returned to the photo unit. This is a World War II defense bond display at Grand Central Terminal in New York City in 1942. It incorporates Arthur's photographs to create an emotional impact on the public. Under OWI, Dad and the other FSA photographers were tasked with creating picture stories like this one, which shows the happy family of a defense plant worker living in housing provided by Reynolds Aluminum. He reassured Americans that our boys would win the war. In this picture, the sergeant is teaching his recruits how to salute. Roy Stryker made sure that his photographer's body of work would be preserved. The file was moved to the Library of Congress in 1944. It is considered to be a national treasure. All the photographs in the collection are in the public domain. They form a comprehensive pictorial record of American life between 1935 and 1944. This is a recent photograph of an actual file drawer in the reading room of the Prints and Photographs Division at the Library of Congress. If you can't get there in person, you can go online and access many of the images in the collection. After his time with Roy Stryker, Arthur Rothstein went on to enjoy a long career, which I'd love to tell you about another time. But this is where I'm going to end this presentation. Any questions?
You have a question, you can put it in the chat box, or let's see.
Nancy, I actually have a question. Annie,
Pretty.
were you ever thinking about going into photography yourself?
I was so intimidated. No way. No way. My sister Eve actually is still a fantastic photographer. I take pictures like everybody else does with their cell phone, and I enjoy taking pictures, but I never considered myself a professional photographer.
Okay, I have a question that just came in. How did your father's travels affect your family?
Interesting. We were not a family yet. My dad was taking pictures from 1935 to 1943 for the Farm Security Administration Office of War Information, and he met my mother in 1947.
Ah.
Aha! So my childhood were the look years, which I'd be happy to make a presentation of and show to you at some other point.
Okay, that sounds good.
25 years of being the director of photography for Look Magazine. Look Magazine there was Look and there was Life, the two big picture magazines. This is before there were many, this is way before digital. This is way before this is before television in some cases. People got their news from the radio or from Look Magazine and Life Magazine.
All right. What does your father do after he stopped traveling?
Okay, after he stopped traveling, he met my mom and he went to work for Look. And he also was constantly teaching. He always taught somewhere. He was a professor at Columbia University, his alma mater. He was also at Syracuse University, Mercy College, Miami. University of Florida, Miami. He was very busy teaching young photographers. He wrote 9 books on photography, 2 textbooks.
I know when we had our exhibit, you lent me 2 cameras. Do you have more than that at home?
We have a lot of cameras here, but a lot of cameras. Most of my cameras are film cameras, so I don't use them anymore. But I have the little cameras that everybody carries around, the Sure Shots and stuff.
Right, right.
But now, because my iPhone, this shouldn't be an ad for iPhone, but it's such a good camera. I don't use anything else.
I wonder, what do you think he would have thought of these digital cameras today?
Oh man, Dad he actually forecasted that this was going to happen.
No way.
He
Wow.
did, yeah, because he was a technical innovator, my dad. My dad invented this thing called, it's a camera that created exographs, and exographs were 3-dimensional photographs. In fact, now you might recognize them when you see, where would they be? On the cover of a notebook, let's say, and you move it this way and that way, and the eyes change position, or the little cat jumps up, or whatever. He invented that camera that takes those pictures, the exograph.
Wow, that is really, really interesting.
Yeah, so he was a technical innovator. He wrote columns on photography every week in Modern Photography, Popular Photography. He had a column in the New York Times. he really, and he was a great daddy. He took us all kinds of places. When he had a Look magazine assignment and he could involve children, he would take us. He would pick a kid and take a kid. He had 4 children.
4 children, okay.
Someone has a hand up, Jackie. Elaine, you're muted.
Who's muted?
Elaine,
Let's see if I can unmute her.
Elaine Whitcoff.
Elaine, you want to send a chat? Would that be easier?
Hit the little mute button.
She may not be able to do that.
Oh,
Enter
can
for a
you?
second.
Annie, you said his first camera was, what was the first camera he ever got?
You know, I'm not sure what the first camera was, to be honest with you. I'm sure it wasn't expensive because his uncle, who was a medical student at the time, bought him this camera. What do you? Yeah. So there were. I found two different. I found 2 different statements about when he got his camera. One was that he got it when he was 12, and the other that he got the camera as a bar mitzvah present. So I'm not sure which one was completely accurate, was absolutely accurate. But I know it was, you got to realize he was, a 13-year-old kid. I'm sure he didn't get a gorgeous, expensive camera.
Did he take a series of anything in the Bronx?
He took pictures everywhere he went. And in fact, as a high school student, he would often offer his photographs in salons to be shown, because there weren't any photo galleries at that time. So as I mentioned, he built a dark room with his uncle in the basement of their home in the Bronx. And he went out every day after school from the time he got the camera, and he would take pictures, and he would buy film in bulk.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was very expensive to buy a roll of film. You bought a large amount of film, and then you spooned it into your camera. So he did things as inexpensively as he possibly could to maintain this hobby and addiction of photography.
That's absolutely amazing.
Elaine unmuted herself.
Okay.
Yay!
It's good to go.
Hi, I would like to ask you, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Who were the other photographers that he admired? There were so many wonderful documentary photographers during that time. And did you get to meet them? Did they come to your home?
Well, yes, we knew many of them because in the 1960s and the 1970s, they were all still alive. Unfortunately, people started to die off in the 70s. Most of those people were much older than my dad. My dad was the kid from the Bronx. They used to call him the kid from the Bronx. Mm. So he knew, even though Ansel Adams was not an FSA photographer, he was very, very good friends with Ansel and Dorothea Lange. I knew her very well. And I knew Russell Lee was my godfather. We knew a lot of these photographers very well. A lot of photographers he knew, Philippe Halsman, very famous photographer. Yeah, we were surrounded by photographers. In fact, I'm still very, very close with Tony Vaccaro and his family. He's now 97 years old. And he was one of my dad's mentees. He lives in Queens, and we see Tony and his family all the time.
What did he think of Ouija?
Oh, brilliant! Brilliant. He took advantage of every opportunity. He was very organized, and yeah, his name was Arthur, also, I believe.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
We just had a question that came in asking if he was alive today, how would he photograph the protesters? and the people being affected by the pandemic, both of them.
I'm sure he would do it with great sensitivity, and probably standing on a box because he was 5'4".
Wow.
He was very good at photographing groups of people and protests and parades. He loved parades. And very often he would take us, the kids, with him, and my mom, of course, who was the wrangler of all of us kids, while Dad was on assignment photographing the Macy's Day Parade or whatever it was. And I don't know how he got these shots. Oh, you asked about people. Stanley Kubrick was one of my dad's mentees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he had let's see, Chester Higgins, who was the New York Times photographer for many years, who's a dear friend of ours. He is one of Dad's mentees also. And in fact, so he had many mentees, Dad.
Did Stanley Kubrick ever make any commentary?
Oh yeah, there's a whole book called Stanley Kubrick at Look Magazine that you should get. It's really a great book, and there's a lot in there about how he started his career, how Dad helped him start his career. Gordon Parks was a dear friend of ours. I used to see Gordon. Oh man, I used to see Gordon at all of the memorials for the photographers because they were all dying off, and thank goodness Gordon lived to be a very old man. And I would see him and he would see me from across the room at one of these memorials, and we'd wind our way towards each other. And then finally we'd embrace and he would say, "Oh, I miss him too." And he always said the same thing. He was just the warmest. He was the best hugger, Gordon. But yeah, so these people were part of growing up, just the most lovely people.
Wow.
Really cared about each other. Photographers had a very tight community.
Did he teach?
Oh yeah, he taught at Columbia University. He taught at Mercy College. He taught at, where else did he teach? He taught at, Daytona. He taught at Parsons School of Design, where I went to school. He taught many places. Syracuse University. He was always teaching somewhere when I was growing up. Yeah.
Jackie, I think Joyce Waxman has a comment or question.
Okay.
Joyce,
Where are you?
are you?
I'm curious, did he ever photograph ballerinas or do any kind
Oh my
of
goodness, what a
theatrical?
funny thing that you should mention that. So Dad, yes, he photographed many ballerinas and dancers and so forth. And one of them was Tanaque Leclerc. And there's a fantastic picture of her holding a parasol. It's just gorgeous. And then he photographed, my mind's a blank. I can't think of his name. He was my ballet teacher. Okay. Yuskevich. Thank you. Igor Yuskevich. So he was a very famous ballet dancer, and he and his wife it was really his wife, but he would show up and at class, and he was such a gorgeous guy to watch dance. So my mom had a very best friend named Marjorie Isaac, and she was someone who had been a ballet dancer and very with George Balanchine, and she helped pay for the gala every year, and sometimes she would invite my mom as a guest, and one of these instances, they're in the elevator on the way up to sit in their seat, and who's in the elevator with them but Yuskevich is in the elevator with them, and my mom can't control herself, and she says, "I know who you are. your wife was my daughter's ballet teacher. And then he said, really? I said, well, whatever happened to your daughter? Did she become a ballerina? And she said, no, actually, she had these welts on the back of her ankles because your wife would smack her with that stick because she didn't jump high enough. And Igor Yuskevich said, oh, but she kept coming back, didn't she? He said, yes, the good ones, they keep coming back. So, yeah. I did not become a ballet dancer either. So my dad photographed a lot of very famous people. He loved this during the Look years. One of his two favorite things to photograph were food and celebrities. So he, at the back of Look magazine, it was bi-weekly, it was every other week, there was this food picture. And Dad loved to do the food picture, and he was really, really good at it. And also, because Look magazine was about culture and news of the week and people, and he used to always have a big article about a famous person. Usually it was a movie star or a dancer or whoever. So Dad photographed, for instance, he photographed Eartha Kitt, he photographed Art Carney, Mickey Rooney, Gregory Peck. Usually when he photographed a movie star, it was because they had a big film that was coming out. He photographed Pope Paul. He photographed 3 popes. He was blessed by 3 popes, which is really cool. He photographed Jimmy Durante and Frank Sinatra and Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh and Jerry Lewis. He photographed a lot of celebrities.
So Annie, I hear in that another exhibition coming. Is that what's your plan? What's up next?
I would love to do that. Thank you for asking, Susan. Actually, next we are having, we were supposed to have an opening of the same photographs on the same topic that your beautiful exhibition was on, the Jews who spent the Second World War in Shanghai. We were supposed to have one of those an exhibition on that topic open at LA Moth at the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust in April, but of course it didn't happen. And then we're supposed to have, the next one would be at, Vienna. Vienna. We're supposed to have another one on the same topic in Vienna. I'd like to have an exhibition on faces, on just portraits that Dad took. And another one just on food, just the food pictures are amazing. It's food porn. It's fantastic.
Right. Let us know. Keep us in the loop.
I will. Yeah. Thank you so much, Susan.
You know, my father was a boy from the Bronx.
He was.
No, and I'd love to see more of the Bronx shots.
Well, I'll get some to you. Thank you, Jackie, for this opportunity. This is lovely.
Pleasure. My
Does
pleasure.
anyone else have any questions? I'd be happy to answer any questions. No?
I see one. Mary Engel has a question.
Mary!
You have to unmute yourself, Mary. You're muted.
Yeah, I can't.
There she goes.
You're muted. You're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm muted by the host. Can I just sing Annie's praises? Is that okay?
Oh.
So Annie, I also inherited a photo archive. My father worked with Annie's father on PM and with Ouija, and my mother was a photographer named Ruth Orkin.
How
But
can I leave your parents out?
no, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to say what she's doing is amazing because she is a charter member. I started a group of people who handle archives. Like we just, sort of got it. We didn't grow up planning this, even though our parents were photographers, but I certainly didn't know I'd make it my career. And 20 years ago, I started a group called American Photography Archives Group, which is a support group for people in Heritage Archive, like Annie and I, and it's grown and grown and grown. We have over 200 people. We have a group in the West, but what Annie's doing is really amazing because we get this archive and it's, you know, there's so much we could work with, and you've taken it and you've worked with so many different aspects of his photography, and you're sharing it with everybody. And I mean, the lecture, I've heard this one before, but and I've seen the show at the Roosevelt House. It's just amazing. And she's our model charter member of doing everything you possibly can with the photographer's work. So I salute you, Annie, as always, and we're dear friends. So
Thank you very much, Mary.
of course.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you all for joining us today on Thursdays at 3. And Annie, it was really a pleasure to have you on and see this really important work done by your father.
Thank you. Anytime, invite me back. Love to do this.
It's our pleasure. Any other questions going once, twice? If we're good?
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Annie, so much. And thank you all again for coming to Thursdays at 3 with the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Bye, Jackie. Thank you.
Bye.
Terrific. Very enjoyable.
Thank you.
You're adorable and fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.